Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're looking at 50 years that absolutely changed the course of history for Papua New Guinea. Between 1800 and 1850, a series of first encounters on its shores really set the stage for a new and, let's be honest, often turbulent future. So, let's dive right in.
Before we get into the story, I just want you to look at this number. Over 800. Just let that sink in for a second. In the context of a single country, what on earth could that represent?
That's right, it's the number of distinct languages spoken in Papua New Guinea. Now, this isn't just a fun fact, it makes it one of the most culturally diverse places on the entire planet. And understanding that incredible diversity, well, that's the key to understanding its whole story.
So let's rewind the clock. What did this unbelievably diverse world actually look like back in 1800? Before the outside world really started showing up.
Well, it was this incredible mosaic of self-sufficient communities. Everything, and I mean everything, revolved around clans and tribes. Each one had these really complex systems for trade, for ceremony, for just about everything. People lived off the land and sea, and their spiritual beliefs were woven into the very ground they walked on. But here's the crucial part. While the coastal areas had their own networks, the huge, rugged highlands, they were a world unto themselves, almost completely cut off.
But of course, change was coming. For people on the coasts, the first signs of a much bigger world began to appear as these strange sails started popping up over the horizon.
For the first 30 years or so of the 19th century, contact was, well, pretty brief and fleeting. You'd have European ships arrive, they'd chart a little piece of the coastline, maybe have a very cautious trade, and then they'd just be gone. This really wasn't about settling down, it was about measurement, trying to turn this vast, unknown place into lines on a map.
Now, earlier explorers had already sketched some rough outlines, but this period saw more focused efforts. You had some failed attempts at settlement, like from John Hayes, and then these big scientific voyages, like Dumont d'Urville's, that were all about meticulously improving the charts. But the key thing to realize is that all of this was happening right on the edges. The vast interior of the island, still a total mystery to outsiders.
Then, after 1830, the reason for these visits starts to change. It's not just about mapping anymore. Now it's about resources. A whole new wave of visitors started arriving, and the interactions, they became way more frequent and a lot more intense.
So what was driving all this new interest? Simple, global demand for luxury goods. And believe it or not, at the very top of the list were sea cucumbers, also called bêche de mer. They were a delicacy in Chinese markets and became a huge driver of trade. But you also had fragrant sandalwood, turtle shells, pearls, and of course the absolutely stunning feathers of the bird of paradise. All of it drew traders to these shores.
And this brought a whole new cast of characters. Suddenly you've got whaling ships from Britain and America using the waters. You had traders from Southeast Asia, Malay, and Chinese who had been in the region for a while, but were now really ramping up their efforts. And then, right alongside them, came the first European missionaries, with a totally different kind of product to offer, a new faith.
But this new era of trade, it was far from an equal partnership. The arrival of new goods, new people, and new ideas brought profound and often devastating consequences, especially for the coastal communities that were now on the front lines of this new globalized world.
So think of it like this trade-off. On one side, indigenous communities were offering up their resources, their labor, their local knowledge. In return, yeah, they got some manufactured goods like metal tools and textiles, but they also got firearms, which threw traditional power balances into chaos, and something far worse: new diseases.
Historians have a name for this: the fatal impact. You see, diseases like smallpox, measles, and the flu were common in Europe and Asia, but they were completely alien here. The local populations had zero immunity, and when these germs arrived on ships with sailors and traders, the effect on some coastal communities was just catastrophic.
The consequences just rippled outwards. You had this tragic loss of life from disease, which weakened communities because so many elders and leaders were lost. Then you throw guns into the mix, which fueled new kinds of conflict. And at the same time, the intense demand for things like sea cucumbers started to deplete resources. The whole social and ecological fabric of these coastal areas was being pulled in every direction. And yet, and this is so important to remember, all of this disruption, all this trade, this disease, it was almost exclusively a coastal story.
You could go just a few miles inland, up into those rugged mountains, and millions of people in the highlands were continuing to live their lives completely untouched by these new forces, just as they had for centuries.
So, as we get to 1850, after 50 years of these escalating encounters, where did things stand? What kind of legacy did this whole period leave behind?
Now, this period didn't bring large-scale colonization. That would come later. But what it did was set the stage perfectly. The coastal areas were now plugged into global trade networks, even if just on a small scale. Outsiders knew a lot more about the geography and what resources were there for the taking. Basically, all the conditions were now in place for the much more intense colonial era that was just around the corner.
It's also really critical to remember how we know this history. Most of the written records we have come from the outsiders, the explorers, the traders, the missionaries, and their perspective is naturally biased. The rich, detailed histories of the Papuan peoples themselves, well, those have been passed down for generations through powerful oral traditions, which often tell a very, very different side of the story. And that brings us to what is maybe the most important takeaway from all of this. This isn't just a story about disruption, it is also a story of incredible, incredible resilience. Faced with these immense challenges, these diverse indigenous societies adapted. They found ways to use new tools, they navigated new relationships, and they fought to maintain their cultural systems in a world that was changing faster than anyone could have imagined. And really, that's the question that hangs over this entire period, isn't it? It's a question that the peoples of Papua New Guinea have been answering for centuries, showcasing a cultural strength and a heritage that is still so vibrant to this very day.